Greetings and welcome to another prophetic insights here at Safe to Serve and Prophesy Again Ministries. We're here on this Sunday afternoon breaking this important news report. It is fulfilling very quickly Bible prophecies. So Hillary, what's breaking?
We have obtained a report from a Jesuit trained insider in which he reveals the steps in which the policies in Laudato Si will be enforced. He states that the policies of Laudato Si will come in a similar manner as how the same-sex marriage law came to America, of course, in the year 2014. 2015.
Yes.
And he states that it will happen within 10 years.
He states that the first step will be to convince the individual that Sunday shopping ban and Sunday rest are the only viable solutions to combat climate change. The second step, the Sunday shopping ban and Sunday rest, will be enacted state by state. What's the last step, Hillary?
The final step will be a national Sunday law. Of course, that will be enforced in America, and then it will spread to the rest of the world.
Let's notice who carried this report firstly. It was first carried by Religion News Service under the following heading: Pope Francis's Laudato Si versus the Green New Deal. It was also carried by Salt Lake Tribune under this heading: Heeding Pope Francis's ecological encyclical could pave way for Green New Deal. And before we get into the analysis of this all-important news report, let us look at the background of the author.
Well, the author's name is Charlie Camosy. And Charlie Camosy, he currently is an associate professor of theological and social ethics at Fordham University, where he has taught since finishing his PhD in theology at Notre Dame in 2008. For those of you who are familiar with Fordham University, of course you know that that is a Jesuit university. Notre Dame, it also has been highly influenced by the Jesuits. So this report is coming to us from a Jesuit perspective. And that's why we say it's an insider perspective, because of course we know that Pope Francis himself is a Jesuit. So this report needs to be seen through Jesuitism, whose primary aim is to reestablish popery and to undo all that Protestantism has done.
So let's analyze the actual news report. The Pope's approach, says the author, of combating climate change in Laudato Si will get climate action and Sunday rest faster than the Green New Deal. Let's read that part, Hillary.
Okay, and we're quoting. He says, "In my previous column, I argued that Pope Francis's approach to climate change, one focused on culture, is far superior to moving immediately to legislative approaches like the recently floated Green New Deal, which has zero chance of passing."
So notice the reason why he says the policies of Pope Francis in Laudato Si would have a better chance of getting climate action and Sunday rest. He says it's the Pope's aim to change the culture in America and around the world. It involves a culture change, a culture shift.
That's right. Currently, the public is not ready to receive a stringent law such as the Green New Deal. But if you change the culture, change the people's way of thinking, then they will be primed, they will be prepared to accept a proposal like the Green New Deal. They will be prepared to accept legislation, climate legislation, even a Sunday law.
Let's hear his words. In light of this emergency, I argued that we need to take the next decade or so to work on changing culture. And then, in the final few years, work to pass dramatic legislation in a changed cultural and political environment. Right now, attempts to shove the Green New Deal down the throats of an unwilling public do little but to push them further away from embracing the culture change we need. Now, let's consider the name of this culture change. It is called ecological conversion. And notice who he says, and the Pope says, must be converted. One, the individual, then the family, then the state, then the country, and of course, then the entire world. Hillary, let's read that.
Okay, I'm quoting, such a conversion, the Pope says, must be both individual and communal, but it
Both
must
what?
be individual and communal.
And listen to this paragraph, it's very startling.
But it must be a fundamental change of life, much like that of the saint best known for his spiritual emphasis on God's creation. They call him Saint Francis of Assisi. Not all of us are called to be saints, he says, but the Pope, who took his name from the great saint of Assisi, insists that the planet now requires a similar kind of conversion from its inhabitants.
We must take on a less is more, anti-consumerism approach to life that will lead us to transcend unhealthy anxieties caused by being trapped in consumer culture. Hear this. We must also celebrate rest, especially from buying and selling, by returning to a focus on keeping the Sabbath. What comes to mind, Hillary?
The mark of the beast, of course, Revelation 13, verse 15.
He had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Friends, this is startling,
That's
to say the
right.
least.
Almost an exact quote. Let's read it again. We must also celebrate rest, especially from buying and selling, by returning to a focus on keeping the Sabbath. They're not talking about the seventh-day Sabbath. They're talking about the papal Sabbath, the spurious Sabbath.
It goes on to say, as it did for the so-called Saint Francis, Pope Francis argues that this kind of conversion, listen to this, can restore, what's that word, Hillary?
Restore.
Don't forget that word, restore ecological equilibrium, establishing harmony within ourselves, with others, with nature, and other living creatures, and with God. My friends, these are the very words of the book, The Great Controversy. I'm going to quote now from page 590. Listen what it says. It will be declared that men are offending God by the violation of the Sunday Sabbath, and that this sin has brought calamities which will not cease until Sunday observance shall be strictly enforced, and that those who present the claims of the fourth commandment, thus destroying reverence for Sunday, are troublers of the people. Read the last phrase, Hillary. The word restore. Go ahead.
Preventing their restoration to divine favor and temporal prosperity.
Again, Hillary.
Preventing their restoration to divine favor and temporal prosperity.
And let me reread what the Pope and this Jesuit insider said. As it did for St. Francis, Pope Francis argues that this kind of conversion can restore ecological equilibrium, establishing harmony within ourselves, with others, with nature, and other living creatures, and with God.
Wow.
That's clear.
Yes, it is.
Now, what must happen then, Hillary? Tell us, to bring about this ecological conversion, this culture shift, this ecological education?
Well, a number of institutions will have to indoctrinate and even control the individual firstly, then the state, then the nation, and then the rest of the world. They'll have to indoctrinate them to what they say is the only viable solution to combating climate change, which is Sunday rest, no buying, no selling on Sunday.
So does that mean that they must roll out a propaganda machine?
Absolutely. And it's already begun. If you notice, well, we'll read the statement and then we'll talk a little bit more. But the propaganda machine is already at work and it's only gaining momentum day by day.
Well, let's read that. And listen to the institutions.
This means that religious institutions must work to help people cultivate a spiritual foundation that makes ecological conversion possible. And anyone who cares about the existential threat of global climate change should do all they can to support religious institutions in this work. That is a church and state union.
Yes.
This kind of culture change Pope Francis has in mind also requires a deep commitment to ecological education to take place.
Listen now, at school, in families, in the media, in catechesis, and elsewhere, the Pope wrote. So notice now, what must they control?
The education,
The schools,
the media,
the churches.
and they say everywhere else.
And what is the objective? What has the Pope been doing as it relates to the media?
Well, he's been meeting with the CEOs of various social media companies and basically selling his agenda to them, and they are shaking hands and agreeing to enforce or to carry out the agenda that they agree upon. And so that's why it's no coincidence that you see all over the media, everything is about climate change. You cannot go a day without looking at the news online and not seeing a report about climate change. And when we think about propaganda, we need to realize that there are many different propaganda techniques that are being used. They use repetition. That's one of the most effective means to wear down somebody's conscience by constantly repeating. Even if it's a lie, they repeat it, they replay it until individuals believe it to be true. They use fear factor as well. They use all kind of other emotional appeals. And if you notice, some of the young people that are talking about climate change, they're crying. Greta Thunberg just spoke before the EU. I believe she just spoke in Britain.
Correct.
And she was crying as she was appealing to the leaders. So they're using these emotional appeals to get people to subscribe to their cause. Propaganda, it's everywhere.
It goes on to say, good education, they say, plants seeds when we are young, and these continue to bear fruit throughout life. These communities, Francis made clear, include our seminaries and houses of formation, which can provide not only spiritual formation, but education in responsible simplicity of life, in grateful contemplation of God's world, and in concern for the needs of the poor and the protection of the environment. Now, two things there. That means they're also going to infiltrate the various seminaries in America and around the world, indoctrinate them, and get the professors now to indoctrinate the students, the seminarians, to join in this movement to combat climate change. And they actually mention spiritual formation.
That's right.
So could it be at the very foundation of the spiritual formation curriculum is the movement to combat climate change?
Ecological conversion.
Spiritualism, ecological conversion.
And as we mentioned, the Jesuits, of course, their founder, Loyola, he was also the father of spiritual formation. So it's no wonder, and that's why it's so dangerous for Seventh-day Adventists to go to these seminaries, these worldly institutions, these Jesuit institutions, and these other Babylonian seminaries wherein spiritual formation is taught. And it's even worse when spiritual formation is brought into Seventh-day Adventist churches, because not only is it spiritualism, well, we just see that spiritualism plays an integral role in this climate change movement.
So what is one of the primary agency and institution to lead the people, the country, and then the whole world to this ecological conversion?
It's the churches.
Oh, friends, the churches.
That's right.
It says, when Christian communities instill such virtues, they can help shift convictions and attitudes which help to protect the environment and bring about real changes in lifestyle. These changes, all right, Hillary?
These changes are not only necessary as part of the direct fight to lower carbon emissions.
Listen to this.
It's the only real hope.
It's the what?
The only real hope. There's the fear factor again. The only real hope we have to change the culture so that one day we will all accept something like the Green New Deal.
And notice they're saying the primary agency is the churches. And we're told in the book Great Controversy, page 590, paragraph 2, that they will accept and second the testimony of religious teachers that the degraded state of morals is caused by the desecration of Sunday. Great will be the indignation excited against all who refuse to accept their testimony.
That's right.
And when we see now many Seventh-day Adventists joining in support of the Earth Day movement, the climate change movement, that means even professed Seventh-day Adventists are paving the way for the coming national, even international Sunday law. Because they are actually following the steps that this Jesuit insider has laid out, showing us how the policies of Laudato Si will be enforced, even the primary policy, Sunday observance by law.
And Sister White also says that Roman Catholic principles will be taken under the care and the protection, not only of the state, yes, of the state, but also of the churches. And that's what we see, that these professed Protestant churches even have embraced this solution, this so-called solution to combating climate change. We are here.
Friends, notice the urgency of this now. This is a Jesuit insider telling us how soon we can expect a Sunday law in America. What is their timeline to indoctrinate the individual?
They want to do
the family, the state by state, then the country, and then the world to accept Sunday shopping ban, to accept Sunday rest as the only viable solution to combat climate change and to get that national Sunday law enforced.
They want to do it within 10 years. 10 years. And Pastor, as we were thinking about presenting this, you had mentioned this prior. You
Correct.
had mentioned how the Sunday law would come in a similar manner. This is only confirming what God had revealed, thankfully to you weeks ago, that the Sunday law would come just as the same-sex marriage law came.
And how did the same-sex marriage become law of the land? By what process, Hillary?
First, it was state by state. Well, first, it was a culture shift
Correct.
in the mindset of the
individuals,
people. The
yes.
individuals
And
were
families.
now wanting to, through the propaganda machine, through the oversaturation of the LGBT lifestyle in the media, they changed their mind. So now it happened individually, it happened state by state, and then after many of the states started agreeing and signing on to it, it became a national law. And after the United States passed it, other countries around the whole world began to pass the
Friends,
same.
For the past few months, I've been sharing, I believe the national Sunday law will come to being in America as a law of the land, the same way the same-sex marriage law became a reality. State by state, about 2 weeks ago, April 13th, 2019, in a message that Sabbath, I shared the following, just a few words, and I hope the audio is loud enough. Take a listen. I believe, what's today's date? April 12, 2019. I believe, 13th, I believe that the same way how the same-sex marriage law became the law of the land in America, the same way Sunday is coming to America. It came to us state by state. We say man and man can get married, state, woman, and state by state. Could it be Sunday shopping ban, state by state? Sunday shopping ban in Florida, in Georgia, in South Carolina, in, Pastor, where are you going? New York. State by state, and then all the way to the west side. state by state. Hold on there. Now, friends, let's read now the Jesuit insider telling us how Sunday will become the law of the land. It's going to go state by state, just as the same-sex marriage law came into being in 2015. Hear what this says. Hillary.
Okay, and this gets back to the timeline.
Yes.
It says, think 10 years isn't enough time. Think 10 years isn't enough time for such dramatic changes to take hold? You underestimate the power of changing hearts. Again, that's through propaganda, right? The power of changing hearts to bring about life-changing legislation. That's their goal, legislation. In 2004, GOP operatives put anti-same-sex marriage policies on state ballots to draw out voters who were opposed to the practice. By 2014, American culture had transformed, there's the culture shift, had transformed so dramatically on gay and lesbian marriage that pushing legislation barring it would have been political suicide.
Our culture could also have an ecological conversion in a similar time frame. Perhaps even faster, given the new technologies. And then he closed with 4 words: let's go to work.
Wow.
To bring about Sunday shopping ban state by state. And then officially a Sunday law in America. And they are saying, just as the same-sex marriage ban, within 10 years, they're looking for a Sunday rest, a Sunday law in America. No wonder they're saying by the year 2030, we want to cut emissions to zero.
Right.
Well, friends, we're in 2019. So you see how all the dots connect.
They do.
To make the picture. A Sunday law is coming. And friends, he says, let's go to work.
Wow.
But what about God's people?
Well, it's time for God's people to watch, work, and pray, because we have a great work to do and only a little time in which to do it. And we see that. It's clear. There's Sunday law agitation from the north, from the south, from the east to the west. That's a call, a clarion call for us to get to work, to get up and put on the gospel armor and go to work for the Lord.
You know, friends, one statement to close. Luke 21. The Bible says, men's hearts,
Failing them for fear,
and for looking after those things,
which are coming upon the earth.
and the powers of heaven shall be shaken, then shall they see the second coming of Christ. And what is one of those things to bring the fear? It's the signs in the waves, the sea and waves roaring, calamities. And then the Bible says, as it relates to preparation, take heed lest your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness and cares of this life, so that day overtake you as
A surprise.
for as a snare will it come upon all that dwell upon the earth. Then verse 36 says, watch you therefore and pray always, that you may be accounted worthy to stand, my friends.
To escape all these things and to stand.
My friends, get ready, and stay ready. Maranatha. Today's date, April 12, 2019.